the untold story of Sita talks a lot about the outer narrative, with some of her teachings. But in terms of how she imparted wisdom to those around her, this is the wisdom she taught them how to live a dharmic life. And when we talk about Ram and Sita as being the essence of Dharma, well, what does that mean? It's how to live a dharmic life. And that's something that we all continually work on, how to live a dharmic life. And so unless we practice these teachings, it's not just a story. It's not just a great story about a war and two kingdoms and all that. These are teachings for how we can't create a dharmic society unless individually we lead a dharmic life.
To introduce our esteemed guest today, Dena Merriam. Dena is a renowned spiritual seeker, author, and the founder of the Global Peace Initiative of Women, an organization that fosters dialogue among world religions to inspire solutions for global challenges. Dena is also an acclaimed author whose books, including My Journey Through Time and The Untold Story of Sita, weave together deep spiritual insights with timeless wisdom. Please join me in warmly welcoming Dena Merriam to share her invaluable wisdom with us today.
Well, welcome and thank you for joining me. We're a small group, but I like small groups. I prefer talking to small groups. So I thought I would share with you what my experiences have been since I was here last year. I came a year ago to launch the publication of The Untold Story of Sita, and I think most of you have read it. So I didn't plan to do a reading from that book today, but to tell you how it's had an impact on me. Because what I find is that Sita, since I started writing that book, Sita has never left me. And I keep having deeper and deeper insights into the whole narrative and what the message is for our time. That's really important, what the message is for our time. Why is this story coming forward now? And how can it guide us through this transition that we're going through? Global society is going through many changes, and I think the road ahead is going to be an interesting one. And we need guidance on how to make sure that we fulfill the higher potential of what is being offered. So after I left India last February, I had already started working on a book called Memories of a Future Life, where I project myself 200 years in the future. And I begin to see how my karma, where my karma will lead me. And because at the second half of your life, you've fulfilled a lot of your karmic obligations that you came in with, but you begin to lay the blueprint for the future. And I saw that I was already laying this blueprint. And I wondered, well, in 200 years, will Ram and Sita be there? Will they be a prominent force in our society? And I saw yes. I'm not going to say too much about the book, but as I was writing the book, and I saw people from my current life and my past appearing, and I began to look for the one I knew as Soma, who was Sita's attendant. You will all be familiar with Soma. And I said to myself, am I going to meet her again? Many of my books talk about different lives, but I didn't find Soma in any of those lives. Am I going to see her in the future? But I didn't find her in the future. I didn't see Soma. And I began to really miss her and want to meet her again. And then I came to India to do the launch of the book. And then I went home. As I got home, I began thinking, as you know, at the very beginning of the Untold Story of Sita, I talk about an experience of Ram that I had. And then in my last book, To Dance with Dakinis, at the end of that book, I had another experience of Ram, which was even more visual, actually. And I said to myself, well, that's interesting. Ram seems to come to bless my book, but I haven't had that experience of Sita. Of course, what happens next is I have a dream of Sita. And in the dream, she directs me into a garden, and there is Soma. And Soma lays out the blueprint for this book, Sita's Yoga. So I began right away writing that book. Each chapter is a different teaching of Sita. And I saw that it was taking me much more deeply into the narrative and to the time period and to the messages that are given for our life today. Because everything that I was writing, I was having to practice in my own life in response to world events or personal events. It's like I'd finish a chapter and I'd be faced with challenges that would make me practice what I was writing. But I thought I would read an early chapter from that book, just to give you a sense. Now, this is not my story. This is a story told to me. And it's the voice of a village woman who meets Sita after she's gone into retreat in the forest to raise her two sons. This is a woman named Devani, a village woman. But this is Treta Yuga, so there were many advanced seekers during this time. And this village woman is an advanced seeker. And in her early years growing up, she receives guidance internally from the one she calls the Devi. She has dreams of the Devi, and she just thinks, well, she's a Devi from some celestial realm who's come to her. And then one day she's in the forest, and she sees Sita with her two sons and Soma in the forest. And she says, oh, she's not. She's a real person. She recognizes the one who's been coming to her is the woman that she now meets in the flesh. And so she says, now I have to meet her. She's real. And so she follows Sita back, and they have an interaction. She has no idea that she's the Maharani. All she knows is she hears Soma call her Mata, and so she calls her Mata, and she thinks she's some great hidden rishi that I've encountered. And since she's a very devout seeker, she begins to ask for teachings. And so this is chapter 2, and it's called The Yoga of Transcending Name and Form. So she's met Sita in the forest. She realizes that she's a human being. And this is the story she tells. About a year after my meeting with Mata, I was in the forest gathering plants when I came across two middle-aged men who seemed lost and were debating how to find their way out of the forest. Approaching them, I asked if I could help, explaining that I knew the area well. They told me that they had come from a town quite some distance away and were on their way to find the Maharani with a petition. The Maharani, I asked in surprise. Why would you be seeking her in these parts? One of the men responded, we are told that her cottage is on the other side of this forest, but which side we don't know. And the path seemed to lead us in circles. Some years earlier, rumors had spread that the Maharani had left the palace for a life of retreat, but nobody knew quite why or where she had gone. Some said it was to give her children the freedom to roam about as she had when she was a child in Mithila. Others suspected that captivity had harmed her health and caused her to withdraw from the demands of palace life. And yet others said that she hadn't left the palace at all. She just wasn't seen very much. Why are you seeking the Maharani? I suddenly asked, thinking it strange that two townsmen would attempt to meet her. One of the men smiled and replied, Ayodhya is far, and we know that the best way to reach the Maharaja is through the Maharani. Whatever comes to her, somehow reaches him. Our petition is about a serious matter regarding a forest near our town, and she is known to care deeply about forest life. Well, I can't imagine that you will find her anywhere near here. I haven't heard a word of where she might be living. The men thanked me and, determined to continue the search, began to walk away. Then the thought hit me that Mata could help them. Wait, I called out. I know someone who can help you find her. She's a great, great Rishika, perhaps the most, well, I don't know how to describe her, but she lives not far from here. If anyone can help you find the Maharani, it is her. They were pleased, and one of the men sighed in relief, saying, Then do lead us to her. Nobody has been able to help us thus far, and we must reach the Maharani. For a moment I hesitated, wondering if I should lead them to Mata, not quite sure if I was doing right by her, as she seemed to prefer a secluded life. But they appeared to be desperate to reach the Maharani, and who else could help them? Mata surely would not mind. So I directed them down the right path and even led them part way. When it was time for me to turn around, one of the men asked, Don't you want to meet the Rishika yourself? You seem to have great reverence for her. Shaking my head, I replied softly, I will wait until I am called. I returned home that day without giving the matter another thought. Mata was so kind that I didn't think she would mind at all helping these two men find the Maharani. A year passed, and I was called to a town quite a distance away to bring medicines to help the birthing process for the women there. I loaded a cart with the right plants, and my husband accompanied me as we left the town. After delivering the plants and counseling two of the women in the town on how to prepare the medicine, my husband and I planned to return to the village. Before leaving, I went to the market to see what was being exchanged. To my surprise, there were so many items that I had never seen before. I picked up a few, thinking to trade for them, but then put them down, realizing there was nothing that we needed. They will just be another distraction, I said to myself. I was standing at one of the stalls when a man approached and greeted me. Aren't you the woman we met in the forest who led us to the Maharani? He asked in a warm tone. Turning around, I recognized him right away. Greeting him in return, I asked, Did you find her then? Did the great Rishika help you? We never found the Rishika you spoke of, but we found the Maharani thanks to you, he replied. We followed the directions you gave us and came upon a clearing with two small cottages. A woman was standing at the gate who knew exactly why we had come, but she said the Maharani was in need of rest. She was about to turn us away when we heard a voice from inside the cottage. Soma, let them come. After all, I have called for them. She then emerged in the doorway, the Maharani herself. I had seen her once in Ayodhya and knew for sure it was her. Thanking us for taking the journey to meet her, she sat with us for quite a while, asking many details about the forest matter. Then she said she would bring the issue to the Maharaja's attention, and it would be addressed. She insisted on feeding us before we left, and then asked the woman called Soma to help guide us back to our town. So thanks to the directions you gave us, we were able to complete our mission, and the forest matter has been resolved. I didn't respond, as I was wondering if the men were speaking truth. It sounded to me that it was Mata they met, not the Maharani. I was perplexed and asked, Are you sure it was the Maharani who met you? He chuckled and he said, How could I mistake her? My brothers and I traveled to Ayodhya for the coronation celebration, as so many people did from throughout the land, from the many villages and towns. There we saw the Maharaja and the Maharani, even though there were throngs of people and we stood at a great distance, we could see them clearly. It didn't matter how close you were, Everyone seemed to have the same experience, a close-up view and a personal interaction. He laughed. I will never forget that day, because as we stood there, I was sure that they were looking directly at me. Later, each of my brothers told me that the Maharaj and Maharani had looked directly at them and smiled. Other townspeople said the same thing. It seems that everyone had a very personal experience. Ever since then, I felt a bond with both, so I was not intimidated in the least by meeting her this time. She made me and my brother feel so at ease. It was like greeting an old friend. After we spoke to her about the issue for which we had come, she said you were there at the coronation celebration, and I knew that you would take special care of the forests. That is why I've drawn you here. The matter will be addressed. Think of it. Among the throngs of people who came to Ayodhya then, she remembered me, even though I stood at a great distance. How astounding. When they repeated the Maharani's words, a great sense of upliftment came over me, as well as the feeling of Mata's presence. Could it be, I wondered? No, impossible. Then I chastised myself, instructing my mind not to wander into useless avenues of thought. What did it matter, I asked myself. To me, she is Mata, and it doesn't matter who she might be to anyone else. My husband spoke sparingly on the journey home, as he was tired from the travel, something we rarely did, and I was happy for the time to reflect. Along the route to the village, a disquietude came over me. When we finally arrived, I made my way to my meditation corner and sat there for quite a while, until I heard her voice asking, "Why be surprised? Don't we all hold many identities? I knew you long before I was the Maharani, and will know you long after. Don't be sidetracked by disguises." Her words made me wonder if Mata had not disguised herself as the Maharani to help the men. But if that were so, how would she have gotten the message to the Maharaja and the men said the problem had been solved? I concluded that my limited mind could not resolve my question, so I did my best to put the matter aside. I trusted Mata completely and knew that whatever she did was for the best. 2 years passed, and I went to the forest to visit my favorite elder tree, whom I had not visited in quite some time. Lowering myself to the ground, I leaned my back against the trunk, remembering all my early attempts at meditation. You were my witness and my support then," I said fondly to the tree. Its branches seemed to sway in response, and laughingly I said, "I know you understand me, and I understand you." Then after a pause I whispered, "I get the feeling that this may be our goodbye." I don't know why I spoke those words. They just slipped from my mouth. Perhaps it was because the tree was old, and I knew that months might pass before I would have a chance to visit again. I drifted into meditation and felt Mata's presence very strongly. Her love flowed to me in mounting waves, carrying me into a most joyful serenity. Quite some time passed, and when I opened my eyes, I found Soma seated beside me in meditation. When she heard me stir, she also opened her eyes. I tried to rise to offer pranam, but she put her hand on my arm and indicated that I should stay seated. "Mata is not with you?" I asked, surprised to see her there alone. She shook her head. "She sent me to you," she added. "You have some confusion about identities, and Mata instructed me to answer your questions. What questions might you have, my dear?" By the slight smile on her face, I was aware that she knew my questions. I was silent for a few moments, then asked in a slightly trembling tone, "Who really is Mata?" "Who do you think she is?" I didn't answer, so she answered for me. As you see her, that is who she is. To each one, she will be different. I don't understand, I murmured. In truth, your question cannot be answered. If you want to know her different identities, her many appearances, I can tell you that. But they are not who she truly is. Is she then really the Maharani, the wife of Sri Ram? That is one of her identities. She's also the mother of Luv and Kush, the daughter of Janak Baba, the Rajkumari of Mithila. She is the protector of the forests, the plant and animal life, the people, and beyond all that lives. What more do you want to know? I didn't respond, and she continued. When you look at the night sky and see the multitude of stars numbering beyond any count, what you are viewing is the barest part of what lies out there, and all of that vastness is just the hem of her skirt. In truth, this whole visible universe is her garment. The universes beyond this visible one, grander and more magnificent, are the jewels that encircle her. She is the essence of all, coming into the world of appearances on rare occasions for a specific purpose. While she is here, she is also there, as are you and I. Don't think this form of yours is who you truly are. It is just one of your appearances. While you are here, I also see you there in the celestial world and know you by another name. That is the truer you. You exist in many places simultaneously, my dear, just as Mata does. Only you have closed off your awareness, as most people have. If Mata is the Maharani, then why is she living a simple life in a cottage near the forest? Soma laughed. Who ever said Mata's life is simple? Her life is more complex than anyone can comprehend, as she is in so many places at once, guiding beings on more than just this planet, without ever moving. But that is not difficult, since she is a manifestation of the universal mind, at one with everything, which is hard for most people to fathom. It is not necessary to know who Mata is, but you will know in time. It is enough to receive her love and give that love to everyone and everything. That is all she asks, nothing more. If Mata is what you describe, then who is the Maharaja? Ah, who is Ram? She let out a great sigh, and then her eyes lit up. A question to which there is also no answer. But I will attempt to describe them, for I cannot speak of one without speaking of the other. You might say they are like two suns circling each other, an inseparable pair, shining together in equal measure. As part of their play, at times she becomes like the moon, reflecting his light, and at other times he is the moon, reflecting her light. To watch them play and dance together through the cosmic ethers is the ultimate joy. They embrace in the fullness of unity and then allow the appearance of separation to come over them for the perpetuation of the manifest worlds. But he's the Maharaja of this land, I whispered almost inaudibly. That he is, but that is not who he is, she chuckled. Which Ram do you want to know? Which Sita? All, I murmured. Sita, the mother, is tender yet firm, giving her sons room to explore and roam, yet ever watchful over their well-being. All her efforts are to awaken in them love and sense of care and responsibility for all that lives. Sita, the wife, is attentive to the smallest details of her husband's life, supporting him and counseling him in all he does, yet never for a moment does she surrender her dignity or place as his full partner in life. To do so would demean him. Sita, the friend, cares for every aspect of our life, aware of every detail, helping us to progress on our spiritual journey, watching over our spiritual progress. Sita, the Maharani, is the guardian of the people in this land and all life that exists within it. In the people, she seeks to awaken a higher purpose. In the animal and plant worlds, she protects and guides them upward in their awakening journey. Her cosmic form I cannot describe. There are no words for it. But that form of hers can be experienced when one has fully awakened to her being within oneself. Now I will describe him. Ram, the father, seeks to awaken in his children curiosity about life and the courage to meet any challenge. He is patient, yet continually urges them to aspire. Ram, the husband, is adoring, filling himself with Sita's love and returning the same. No aspect of her well-being escapes him, as she is never out of his thoughts. Ram, the Maharaja, is attentive to the needs of every person in the kingdom, making every decision based on the well-being of the whole, never placing one group or individual above others. He is the model of dharmic life, as is she, and together they set an ideal of what a true partnership can be, a friendship and love of the highest order. You may see them as two people, as two solar bodies, or as two cosmic beings, it doesn't matter. The essence of their being is love, because love is the foundation of all that is. It is love that brought this universe into existence. It is love that maintains it and will withdraw all that is into the cosmic self when the play is done. It was love that drove Ram and Sita into the forest for so many years, enduring physical hardships for the sake of helping the forest communities evolve. It was love that sent them into Lanka to free their devotee imprisoned in delusion and to free his followers who had been captivated by his illusionary powers. And it was love that sent Sita into the forest for what you call a simple life. Love for Rishi Bhrigu, who long ago unknowingly cursed Narayan to know the pain of separation from his wife. Soma stopped speaking and closed her eyes. She remained that way for some time. When she opened her eyes, I asked calmly, "So that is the cause of the separation?" Soma nodded. "It is not publicly known because that would cast a cloud over that esteemed great soul, and neither Ram nor Sita would allow this. Narayan took on that curse to free Rishi Bhrigu of his anger, but he can't be fully free until the curse has been fulfilled. I once heard Sita say that the Rishi performed a great service because having to fulfill the curse made her realize that the error of cursing must end. Ram will now establish a system of justice independent of the sages. That is needed for society to advance. Sages also have their predilections, their emotional responses, which can weaken their clarity of sight. Words are not enough to describe who they are. One must experience that reality." Soma closed her eyes and drifted into meditation. I did the same, and within minutes felt myself merging with Soma's consciousness, experiencing what she was describing as I heard her words internally. I will share with you a very personal story of how I came to know them. I've been with Mata since her childhood, but it was not until after her marriage that I came to truly know who she is. It was as if through their union, the reality of who they are became more apparent. We had just come to Ayodhya, where we were getting adjusted to a new life. Since the marriage, I had not had the opportunity to spend much time with Sita for personal conversation. There were so many people around and many demands on her. When I had first set eyes on Ram in Mithila, before the marriage, I saw him in a blaze of light, and I could not help but wonder who this wondrous being was. Yet I never voiced this question. But after we came to Ayodhya, the question continued to haunt me. In the day, I saw him as the Raj Kumar interacting with his family, an attentive husband to Sita, but at night, when I closed my eyes, I would see him as I first did, in a blaze of light. After we had been in Ayodhya for several weeks, I had the opportunity to be alone with Mata. The other servants had retired for the night, and Ram had not yet come to call for her. I had just finished helping her change from her formal wear. I had taken all the jewelry and put it away, and was about to take my leave when she asked me to stay. She sat down on some cushions on the floor, and I seated myself in front of her, looking into her eyes, wondering why she asked me to remain. Then the question again arose, who is Ram? Her response was internal. I heard her voice from within. He is the undivided self, the self in all. Beyond time and space, he yet resides in time and space, as there is no place where he is not. His name is the cosmic vibration that brings everything into being. It is inscribed in every element, and just by reciting that sacred name, one can awaken the consciousness that resides in all, in every speck of dust. Yet truly he has no name, no form, but you can find him in all names and forms, as there is nowhere that he is not. Without him, I'm nowhere to be found. With him, I am found everywhere. But one cannot know Ram through words alone. One must experience him, become one with that, awakening that one within your own being. That is how to know Ram. Don't look outside, Soma. Find him as the very essence of yourself. As she spoke internally those words, I was lifted into a supernal reality. All thoughts evaporated, and I sank into a deep ocean of bliss, losing consciousness of the outer world, aware of only that, of Ram, 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 that great cosmic self which is reflected in all that is. Within that self, I saw all universes floating, turning, changing, evolving. I saw past, present, and future contained within, the beginnings of worlds infinite in number, and their endings, and their new beginnings, the endless rounds of evolving life. And I was part of that evolving life, not separate, but one with it. It was extraordinary, more wondrous than the mind can imagine. I would have remained in that state forever, but could not, for I was called back to the outer world. When I opened my eyes, it was not Sita who sat before me, but Ram, and I could not suppress the question that rose internally. If that is Ram, then who is Sita? And again, the internal voice responded, but it was the voice of Ram, not Sita. There is no Ram without Sita, for she enables me to come into being, to express myself through the multitude of universes, through every changing forms of life. She is the love that creates and maintains all that is, the dynamism, the magnetic flow, the magnetic energy that flows through all. Without her, I'm nowhere to be found. With her, I am everywhere and everything. Seek her, and you will find me. Seek me, and you will find her. We are inseparable, the undivided one, yet there is nowhere to seek, because we are in all that is. Look within, and you will find us residing there, waiting to be awakened. His words again awakened me to a supernal reality, once more sinking into an unending ocean of joy. I found myself by Sita's side, passing through corridors of space and the spaceless realms, beyond the flutterings of thought and self-awareness. I was she, and she was me. There was no distinction. I had awakened to the reality beyond name and form, to the one consciousness that abides in all that is. Call it Ram, call it Mata, call it the Supreme I. At the first rays of dawn, I opened my eyes and found myself alone. I sat there for hours until I heard the door open and saw Mata enter, dressed in her royal clothing. I had no words and could not move. She approached and our eyes met in a knowing embrace. With a smile, she extended her hands to help me rise to a standing position. Come, Soma, she said lovingly. We must get ready for the day ahead. That ends chapter 2. And the next chapter, which I won't read, is the yoga of inner transformation. So that is what I've been engaged in since my last visit here a year ago. Open the floor for discussion or comments or questions.
So I'll open it to the floor first.
So this told your fiction only.
I think that is up to the reader to decide, not me. For me, it's a very real experience. But the reader can take it as fiction or not, however the reader perceives it. If you experience it as I do and actually transport yourself there, it becomes a real experience. When I'm writing this, I am in the book, so to speak. I'm experiencing it. So it becomes, for me, a very real experience. And I receive a teaching. So, you know, in reading this, in this chapter, we all have many identities. And yet we all get attached to our outer identity. For some people, Ram was simply the Maharaja, a great Maharaja, and Sita was simply the Maharani. That was what they saw. For many others, though, they saw to the essence of who Ram was, and that's what the chapter was trying to explain, that you can tap into any level. You can tap into the most superficial, and even on the superficial level, we all hold many identities. But deeper than that, over the course of our history, we've had many names and bodies and forms and roles, and so who are we? So the question keeps coming back, not to look outside, but to look inside. Who are we? Who am I?
Dena, I'm just curious that how, I know you've talked about it in your book Journey Through Time, but could you little bit more, like shed a bit more light on what process do you go through when you start visiting your previous lives?
So many people ask me that, and it's very hard to describe. But as you know, I've been a serious meditator since I was 20, which is a long, long, long time ago. I've taken meditation very seriously as the center of my life, really. And each person gets different experiences in meditation. Some people see light, some people have different experiences. For me, my experience has been to awaken memories of the past or to see into the future now. I mean, if you can see the past, you can also see the future, because it's a matter of transcending time. And so you can also transcend space. Both time and space can be transcended, and there's a whole other chapter on that, on transcending time and space. So much of my early life was dealing with time in the past, and it would initially be sparked initially by a person who came into my life, something that happened, and then in meditation, memories would arise. And I spent many years as a time traveler, you could say. More recently, as a space traveler, because the cutting edge of physics is finding the truth of many things that the rishis have talked about. For example, the non-locality of consciousness is now becoming mainstream physics. Consciousness doesn't reside in the brain. The brain is a vehicle. So that's a very significant shift in worldview. Another major shift in worldview is the realization that this is a multidimensional universe. And that our sense perceptions are so limited that we cannot see beyond a narrow scope. So cutting edge physics is recognizing. So what we might have called the celestial worlds, the heavenly realms, we might in the future begin to call other dimensions. And so can we transcend the limitations of the senses to access those other dimensions? We can, through practices that we can, so that we can also reside in other places. And that has been my experience of late, and which comes across in this book of being able to sort of, and there's a Buddhist practice that I know which is called the transference of consciousness. So a Buddhist teacher, when one of their devotees is leaving the body, dying, so to speak, the teacher can transfer their consciousness to guide that soul through the process until it enters whatever realm it's appropriate for that being to be in at that time. And so once you realize this, it changes your whole worldview. Well, what is death? Is death leaving this physical world, or is death leaving that dimension? You know, we have a whole life in that dimension as well. And I think that science will soon, I mean, as my books have circulated, particularly my first one, My Journey Through Time, there have been many people in the West who now have these experiences, maybe not as vividly as mine, but inclinations. They know that they have previous births. And I think that, you know, there's the phenomenon of the hunter's monkey. As soon as a certain number of a species gain a certain ability, it just becomes prevalent. It may be that in the higher ages, this was more common to be able to see your past and future. Certainly in the Treta Yuga, I think people had that ability more. And maybe that ability is now, even if you don't have it, people can acknowledge that, yes, this is the way it is. So how do I come to my experiences? All I can say is through meditation.
My questions are with respect to your journey as a writer. So, of course, when you write, you first experience it internally. And that experience is very, very real for you. So the first question arises, when you write, it's an outer expression of your internal world. So do you feel there is a difference between the truth of your internal self, the truth of that experience, and the truth of your outer expression when you write? So this is my first question. Second question is, in your journey throughout these books, have you ever felt moments of where there is veil of doubt between the truth outside and the truth inside? And can you give us some examples how you let go and thin that veil of doubts so that the truth of the inside and the truth on the outside is similar?
I'll answer your second question first. When, in my first book, My Journey Through Time, I was about 40 at the time. I had been a meditation practitioner for many years. I was divorced, raising teenage sons, 2 teenage sons. I had been married to a psychiatrist, but divorced for a number of years. And I began to have these very vivid experiences of my birth just previous to this, which is in My Journey Through Time. And I had to question myself. I mean, I'd been married to a psychiatrist. I mean, I had to say, you know, there are people who, you know, imagine all kinds of things. But there was someone who came into my life from that previous birth who began speaking to me of things that I remembered. But I didn't even accept it. I actually went, I had been born in Russia before the revolution. I actually went to Russia and looked for my house. I remembered I left Russia during the revolution and died in Europe during World War II. I went to the place that I remembered dying to find my house. And it was, I have to say, destabilizing, because here I am holding a job as a writer in a PR company, so I'm a writer for hire, basically, raising a single mom, raising 2 sons, and it could come over me anytime. Could be sitting in a meeting and suddenly finding myself back in that life, which had a number of traumatic episodes, leaving Russia and then World War II, all that. But I did meet my guru in that life, which was the most precious thing for me. That on his way back to India, he passed through Europe, and I was invited to meet him. And so I saw him very briefly, but that encounter is what led to my birth in this life, to find him so young and to become a devotee. I had wanted to follow him, how I desperately wanted to follow him back to America, but I couldn't. I died. And he came to me when I died and said, I've come to take you to America. So before I died, I had a dream of him where he says, I'm coming to take you to America. And I was waiting, trapped in Europe, waiting for him to come take me to America. I took it very literally. But then I died, and he said, I'm coming to, and then I was born rather quickly in America. So you can imagine a young woman, I was a young woman, it was a little destabilizing, to say the least. And I say to people, don't dig if it doesn't come to you organically. This happened to me organically. What could I do? I don't go to past life regression, whatever. I only accept what comes to me organically in terms of spirituality. I don't try to go into field, because there are danger zones, you know. And all I can say is, thank God I was never anyone famous, because I don't claim to have been this, you know, person or that person, you know. But it was hard to, and actually when I wrote that book, I never intended to publish it. What's driven me is to understand this law of cause and effect. How does one life, because if you can understand it, you can better guard your future. If you can understand how the past created your present conditions, then you can work toward the future that you want. This was really what was my stimulus to understand this. But a friend of mine, a close friend, a writer friend, who had just started meditating, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and she went through a lot of fear. And she said to me, I want to read your book. I said, well, it's about past life stuff. I don't know if you're going to, I want to read it. Well, she read it, and it helped her so much. She said, do you mind if I share this with friends of mine who are sick, facing death? And so she said, Dena, you got to publish that, because there is a lot of fear around death. So I published it. I showed it to a few spiritual friends of mine. They said, don't publish it under your name. You work in the interfaith world, you know, don't use another name. I said, but it's my life. How can I not use my name? So I did. And soon after, I got an email from a prominent Christian theologian that I had worked with, and said, Dena, I read your book. I have to talk to you. I didn't respond. I said, oh, here it comes. He wrote me again and said, I must talk to you. So I called him, and he said, I was fascinated. And after I read your book, I started looking into all the research, which I didn't know there was research in this topic, but there is apparently. He said, it's irrefutable. So, and he said, I've been inspired now to read more about this. So then I got an email from a Catholic priest that I knew, and he said, Dena, I've just read your book, I have to talk to you. And so I said, oh, okay. I called him, and he said, wonderful. He said, wonderful. It doesn't refute anything that I believe. And I realized that, why is this coming to me now? Maybe because the time is right. I happen to have these vivid memories. So maybe the time is now really to come out in the open and talk about it openly. It's a game changer. It's a game changer for any people, because the deepest fear is the fear of death. People don't know. Is it the end? Does anything come after? If people can tap into the reality of that they've been around a long time and they will be around a long time, it's not the end, it's just a new chapter. It can, I think, be a real game changer. So in terms of my internal experiences, whether it comes through when I express it, I have to keep refining and refining and refining. Often it's hard to find the words to express an internal experience. So I do a lot of self-editing because I don't quite get it the first time. It doesn't quite express what I've experienced, especially in this book, because I'm not relying on my own sort of memories. I'm sort of accessing something else, and I want to do it accurately. So there are days when I can't write because I just can't become that channel, and then there are days when it just all flows very, very quickly. So I've learned to, but one thing is true, is that I need a lot of time alone and very much internally focused in order to be able to express what I experience.
So, Dena, tell us more about the upcoming book.
Well, it's been a personal teaching for me because it deals with, each chapter is a different form of yoga. So there's one that is called the yoga of non-judgment. And I've had to, as I'm writing this, I'm watching my own mind, seeing how subtle it can be in terms of how we make judgments. Why is, and there are many stories woven in about Ravana. Can you really judge a situation if you don't know the history, if you don't know what takes place behind the scenes? You're just looking at a snippet, you know. Who's like, we look at the world scene today, some of the people who are, we could easily judge as sort of modern Ravanas. Do we know who they were before? Do we know why they're doing what they're doing? Do we know what's going to be the outcome? Could it lead to a positive outcome? We don't know. And so, and that happens in your personal life too, when you're judging people, someone is doing something. Well, you unless you see their history, a great seer, a master, can see the history. So they can understand more how to deal with a certain situation. So that chapter has helped me enormously. And each chapter takes a different aspect of, it's sort of like a how to live your life. You know, what I realized is the untold story of Sita talks a lot about the outer narrative, with some of her teachings. But in terms of how she imparted wisdom to those around her, this is the wisdom she taught them how to live a dharmic life. And when we talk about Ram and Sita as being the essence of Dharma, well, what does that mean? It's how to live a dharmic life. And that's something that we all continually work on, how to live a dharmic life. And so unless we practice these teachings, it's not just a story. It's not just a great story about a war and two kingdoms and all that. These are teachings for how we can't create a dharmic society unless individually we lead a dharmic life. And then the other thing that physics is proving is if we understand the interconnection, that we know that everything we do contributes to the whole. We can add shadows or we can add light. So, it's not in this book, it's in my next book, Memories of a Future Life, which hopefully will come the year after. There's a section there on how our individual anger manifests itself in anger in the world. So there is a lot of anger in the world today. And our anger adds a molecule to that. Well, a molecule is something, just like fear. There's a lot of fear in the world today. Our fear adds a molecule to that. And so what can we do? We can do a lot by working on our own anger, our own fear. And so I've taken each chapter as a different teaching that I'm trying to apply in my life. That the whole thing being about how to create a dharmic world by really bringing dharma into your day-to-day life.
Dena, I'm quite fascinated to see you talk about physics now. I love it. I can see that as you move from time into space and talking about multi-dimensions, it's fascinating. I always wanted to understand from your perspective this thing called knowledge and education, because you started very simply. And then this powerful quote from Tema in chapter 11 is beautiful. So I want to see how you stitch together knowledge, knowing, intuition, and edge of physics with what Tema says to the simple tribal woman in the forest in Africa. My child, you came for love, not knowledge, but in the end they are the same. Could you please give us further insight?
First, I should say physics is my new area of interest. Physics and mathematics, which I was never very good at. I was always a literature person. But I started reading books on quantum physics because I want to understand, because I do believe that for the upcoming generations who, I mean, the time of religion might be over. You know, institutions don't really work for a lot of younger people. There's a lot of disillusionment with that. And it may be through science that people come understand these truths. So knowledge, yeah, knowledge leads you to love. I mean, you know, it's funny that we have such a hard time using that word. I was part of a session at the UN had pulled together some people to talk about a language of ethics. And I brought up the word love and was immediately shut down. That's taboo to use that word in the UN system. So, okay, you can use compassion, you can use care, but you can't use that love. So, so they say in Dwapara Yuga, which is the age that we've entered, that humankind comes to understand the laws of electricity, of which we've just begun to tap. But they say in Treta Yuga, humankind can perceive divine magnetism. What is divine magnetism? It's what keeps everything together. It's love. It's another word for love. And so, you know, we shy away from that word. I think because people confuse it with emotional feelings. And in my future book, Memories of a Future Life, the subtitle is Becoming Love. Love is not an emotion, it's a state of being. And I think if there was another word to separate out the emotional feelings of, you know, of attraction, really, from that deeper experience of divine love. I mean, the feelings of attraction are an aspect of it, but they're a superficial aspect. It's not the whole thing. And so when you talk about knowledge and love, I see them as the same. I mean, can you come to that place of true knowledge and not experience love? I don't think so. And sometimes I look at some of these people who claim to have knowledge, and I say to myself, but they're grouchy. You don't feel love coming from them. You feel like an irritability, and it's like something's missing. They may have intellectual knowledge. You know, they can recite things, and they can, you know, there's a certain rational, logical intelligence that they have. But if knowledge, wisdom, you can't have that without love.
It's interesting to hear your views about knowledge and wisdom and love. If you look at the sweep of history, till the invention of printing, and from there onwards to the next 200 years, the knowledge revolution really took off. The knowledge revolution really took off.
Right.
And now, in the last 20 years, it has even gained greater traction. Now, if there is so much of knowledge, of reason, of faith, all across, why is the world seeing so much of violence, so much of anger, as compared to what you were saying, that if there is knowledge, it leads to wisdom and therefore it leads to love?
You know, knowledge is a word. It can mean different things to different people. Just like intelligence, we have artificial intelligence. Well, what do we really mean by that? You know, we mean that computers have a way of compiling data very, very quickly, and they can compile huge amounts of it. Is that intelligence? I don't know. But it certainly means that it can compile an infinite amount of data very quickly. So knowledge, I mean, there's knowledge that you gain from observation of the rational world, and then there's knowledge of the inner workings of really how does this, what is this universe? What is this universe and who are we? That's a different kind of knowledge. And that is, intuition is needed for that. I think that we've suppressed intuition and focused overly on the rational mind. Well, both are needed, both the rational and the intuitive mind. We're out of balance, so it's to bring them back into balance. And through the intuitive mind, I think you access this love. I'm not sure, does that answer the question?
It's getting there, yes.
Okay, okay. So I think it's how we understand knowledge. What kind of knowledge? I mean, there's knowledge of the physical world. I mean, there are many ways. All of these words, it's just like I said with love. For love, some people means attraction. So we're limited by human language because we each have different understandings of what these words mean. So that's the human limitation. But hopefully there'll come a time when we can communicate through thought and get beyond the language limitations. So I'm not sure if I answered the question.
So a follow-on question, Dena, on that is that knowledge is leading to self-realization of love.
Right.
So how does that somehow then impact the violence that is?
Well, I think the violence comes because of lack of understanding. If we understood the interconnection truly, if we understood that by bombing a certain people, we're hurting ourselves. People don't understand interconnection. We use that word, interdependence, we use that word. But how could we inflict harm on another and not know that we are going to suffer in this life and in a future life? I mean, if we understand the law of cause and effect, and if we understand the laws of interconnection, we wouldn't be committing violence. It's the lack of understanding. So I think that, love opens us to an understanding of these laws of the universe. And I think that's the only way to prevent violence. How do people, violence is often caused by anger and fear. One group is angry at another group is fearful, so they fight each other. So unless we can moderate our anger and fear, and again, we have to do it individually. We have to work at the individual level. I think that's a very important aspect, though. If people realize by hurting another, they're hurting themselves, they might take a different course.
I think love is a natural instinct in human or plants or animals. So why love is not dominating? Why hatred is there in humankind or animals, or why people are not prevailing on love? Why love is not prevailing?
It's a good question. Why? I think it's because people have different understanding of this word, and they look at it as being somehow wishy or something. You'll never find it in any official document anywhere, not only at the UN level, but at state level as well. Nobody talks about love. I mean, that hopefully will change. I mean, maybe we all need to start doing it. But again, I think we have to talk about, I mean, it's all tied to this understanding of interconnection, and that we are the other, So these things have to be talked about more widely, more broadly. People use these terms, interconnection, but what does it mean? Okay, the economies are interconnected. They look at the most superficial. The economies are interconnected, the environment is interconnected. But what about actions? The harm that I caused you, am I not going to feel it? So again, I think we all have to start using these words more broadly.
Then don't you feel knowledge is the first step and wisdom is the next step? And when we talk about love and all that, unless there is wisdom, I don't think there would be love, or we could when we talk about hatred and all that, there has to be the next step of wisdom, which would teach us how we can love or whatever your feelings are.
I think knowledge comes first and leads to wisdom. And I think, you know, they talk about the wisdom of the heart, the wisdom that the heart knows. It's not, wisdom is not just a mind thing. Knowledge, we think more of a mental process. But wisdom is a deeper level. And I think it combines the heart energies to have true wisdom. So it's, you know, it's combining all these ways of knowing, the mind, the heart, the intuitive. The intuitive is the sort of like directly a soul perception, what our deeper self experiences. And I think all that together leads to true wisdom.
When we talk about wisdom or love and all that, unless we go deep into the inner journey, so to achieve all that, the inner journey is very important, which gives you the strength of what you've been talking about.
The inner journey is crucial. It's the key. Without the inner journey, you stay on the surface. And I don't think you can come to a state of wisdom without that inner journey, because you get to see deeper into things, you know, even understanding more why, you know, certain characters, why they behave the way they are. I mean, all of these things, all of these different yogas practices help you with the inner journey so that you can come to a place of wisdom.
What is your vision and view into how education should be?
You want a 2-minute summary? You know, in Memories of a Future Life, I have a section on education, what education could look like. I also have a section on economics, what a different economic system would look like. I mean, 200 years in the future. So world is going to be very different. The world is very different from 100 years ago, right? But it's a challenge. This has not been an easy book. I mean, I can see my own story, and I'm telling my own story, but I have to put it into the context of what the world looks like. I always try to do that, put it into the context of what the world looks like at that time. So I think education has to be much more focused on inner development. You know, it's all focused on acquiring the skills needed to get a job, which is not insignificant. People need to work, so it's acquiring those skills. But unless there's inner development, you know, character development and you know, internalization, meditation, some forms of a non-sectarian meditation should be in all schools, just so children learn how to reflect and interiorize. And then I think what that would look like, inner development, is, you know, that would emerge from many of the spiritual traditions, but again, non-sectarian, just basic, you know, character development. You know, children are not learning. In addition, in today's world, they have to learn how to discern and cut through all of the noise that our society has, you know, misinformation and all of that, and how to moderate the external voices. So for that, they need discrimination. There's a complete lack of that in people today, discrimination. How to discern what's true and what's not true. And it's really gotten to the point where it's dangerous. You know, because, I mean, anybody can make up any story. and you could have, thousands of people believing it. So developing these key, qualities of discernment, discrimination, and the importance of integrity. There are some schools, there are some, private schools that try to do this, but I think that there's no, and also connection with nature is essential for every student. They should be growing food just to understand the relationship with the soil. So there are many, many aspects of this: inner development, the connection with the natural world, care for life, animal life, not just through teaching it, but through the experience. It has to become more experiential. So, in the past, schools were in the institutions of learning were in the forests. They were, in the sort of heart of life, where life takes place. And now they're all removed. Kids sit in classrooms. I don't think classrooms will be the model for the future. Wow. I think people will be having more experiential forms of education.
Just want to know the untold story of Sita. And this is a very good thing. You are exploring Indian mythology in a deeper sense. But the terminology untold, because India, even whole Southeast Asia, have a different versions of Ramayana. Even North, South, West, Cambodia, Java, Sumatra, Bali, Burmese, all. So, which part you are telling untold in the life of Sita?
In all of the different versions, it's centered on Ram. My story is centered on Sita. This is Sita's story, a story that has not yet really, she's not yet been the major driver of the story. So this is her story. And it's time to tell her story. And there's a whole explanation of why it's important to tell Sita's story now. Because our society is changing and people want to hear Sita's, they want to hear the whole story through her eyes. So what did she experience? What was her role? And so that's why this is different. Rama's there, but this is Sita's in the center. Yeah.